Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Matt Ellsworth with us. Matt, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're glad you're here because you are the VP of Growth at Storefront, which is a great name for what you guys do. But tell us, what is Storefront?
Storefront is a marketplace for short-term retail space. And so very specifically what we do is we help retailers find places to open up shops for short periods of time. A traditional lease is usually 12 months and beyond. And that's been primarily people's kind of grief with going offline, doing an offline store up until now. So online has become a lot easier in the last couple of years, in the last 5 to 10 years, actually. So we want to make it as easy to open up an offline store as it is to open an online store. And then the marketplace aspect of that is that we also work with space owners that have retail space available or just extra space available and help them to list it online so that renters will become interested in it. So we've been called Airbnb for retail before, so that kind of helps people, that metaphor helps people understand.
Yeah, I was just thinking like Store Envy or Shopify for like the physical world, something like that. So Airbnb, that helps too. That's good.
We've actually done a store with Store Envy. They have a pop-up shop in Crocker Galleria in downtown San Francisco that they started doing with us. It started off as like four of their local sellers in there, and a bunch of them have done really well. One of them, it was their first store. They did so well that they opened up their own store permanently in that same center. And Store Envy's been there since February, and they just rotate people in every month. So they're going through the end of the year.
Do you see people doing it that way where they actually use Storefront to kind of validate the idea of having a full-fledged store of their own? Is that what people are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we get requests from all sorts, right? We get requests from like the top, echelon of like retailers that have retail stores all over the place. But for them, pop-up represents the ability to A/B test the offline world. Lululemon actually will open up stores in multiple neighborhoods and see which one does the best. They do temporary stores, and then and then at that point they'll double down on which one is doing the best and maybe open up a flagship store there. The thing that has stopped people from doing that in the past is, working with landlords and going off of like historical sales data for other retailers, but that doesn't necessarily translate for them. And I would say some of our biggest clients or like most frequent clients are e-commerce companies. And, in e-commerce, you can track everything, and the offline world is a lot harder to track. So for us, we kind of represent them like, tiptoeing into the water to see how warm it is, and how well they do. And I think a lot of them are actually really surprised at how great offline can be with good foot traffic and, in the right spot, obviously.
Yeah, it's really exciting what you guys are doing. How long have you all been around right now?
We've been around since early last year is when the two founders started kind of doing the research and talking to e-commerce companies like, is this something that's viable? We started placing people last year in December when we actually kind of did the scrappy startup thing, and we rented a space ourselves in Westfield Mall here in San Francisco. And about 3 or 4 days into December, started calling people trying to rent it out for December. So it was pretty crazy, but we got, I think, 11 different vendors in there throughout the time. So we rented it out for like 3 days at a time if we had to. Some people took it for longer. We even did multi-tenant stuff in that space. So it was quite the scramble. But we've been actively placing people since then. And since then, we've done over 150 pop-ups.
Wow, different locations, 150 different locations, or 100?
Yeah.
That's great. And what cities are you in right now? Are you just in San Francisco, or are you venturing out there?
Yeah, so we're in San Francisco, New York, and soon to be officially LA. So we have spaces that are listed from all over the place. We have kind of concentrations in San Francisco, New York, and LA. And similar to some other listing sites out there like Airbnb, we take professional photographs of the spaces because we find that they convert much better when people really, can get some eye candy. So those are the three markets that we'll do photographs in because that's where we have our photographers. But then, people are kind of allowed to upload from wherever they'd like. We have some in London. We have all over the US. I mean, even small secondary markets are really interesting to us because sellers have access to the internet, so they know what's happening in retail. They know that pop-ups are happening. Maybe they're not happening in their city, but if I'm a seller online and I'm savvy and I'm paying attention to retail blogs, I know that people are doing this in New York, so what's stopping me from doing it in my hometown?
Yeah, let's talk about how you achieve some of that growth. To have 150 different locations, you've only been around since December, so you're still less than a year of actually actively renting space and doing those kind of things. So that's quite a growth curve when you're talking about physical locations. I mean, we're
Yeah.
not talking about 150 digital things. We're talking about 150 physical locations. So
Yeah.
I want to reiterate that because I don't think people realize the difference sometimes, like how much more difficult offline is. So let's talk about how you achieve that kind of growth. Because looking at your stuff online, it seems like you're very process oriented when it comes to the sales cycle, when it comes to customer acquisition. How important is a process for a salesperson?
Yeah, so I mean, a process is really important for just about anybody. I think that when you're in a startup, especially early stage, I have a couple opinions on kind of early stage sales
Hmm.
and seeding marketplaces for one, because we are kind of selling to two customers, right? So that inevitably brings some challenges. Um, and I think probably the easiest way to start off with growth there is to just kind of focus on one side of the equation that you think needs more of a push
Hmm.
than the other one. But in terms of processes, it's been absolutely the number one thing that we focused on. So I think early on, it's probably like right when you first start selling to people or you first start getting customers, it's probably too soon to start doing like crazy A/B tests and get too technical, too worried about the numbers. And it's more of a time to trust your gut, at least in my opinion. So when you start talking to people, you kind of see what resonates with them, and then you kind of just roll with it.
Hmm.
And a lot of like early stage sales, I think, are definitely brute force, right? Because you can't afford to be overly technical about everything when you're doing a million different things. When you're a small team and you're doing a bunch of different things, you kind of got to double down on what's working.
Hmm.
And the more leverage that you can be in those activities, in terms of like, what's the energy amount that I'm putting into this and what am I getting out of it? The more you can kind of focus on that, the better. But I would say that like the very beginning of sales processes for a seed stage startup is very brute force. So
Hmm.
describe it as that, right? You brute force, you get out there, you prove that there are people interested in it. You probably are doing some cherry picking. You're not
Hmm.
sticking around to wait for people to say, that you're not arguing with people if they're not interested,
Hmm.
less objection overcoming,
Hmm.
depending on what you're doing, and more kind of just getting the people that are early adopters in the door and getting them going. But processes are absolutely huge for us, and uh, we probably should document more of them, but we do a really good job here of just kind of updating people on a weekly basis on what the process is for how we're doing this. And
Hmm.
um, I, in our organization specifically, growth touches like literally everybody, so everybody is affected by it. So we try to make it so that everybody knows what's going on and what we're doing, and knows what the process is if should a customer reach out to them specifically, et cetera.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I agree with what you're saying that early on, it's not the time to polish the chrome. You're still working on the engine. I mean, you're still got
Yeah.
major chunks of the business that need a lot of attention. So it's not the time to, sit around and worry about what color the car is going to be when it doesn't
Right.
even run yet, And
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, in even more of that, I would say that I definitely have difficulty with this. And I think anybody that is kind of the engineering-esque mindset, even if you're not like a computer engineer, but if you like to build things and kind of build out processes, it's
Mhm.
really easy to over-engineer those processes as well. And we've done it. I've done it. We've had to like sometimes keep each other in check and say, look, I think you're like trying to solve for problems that you think we may have down the road, but we don't have them yet.
Yeah.
So let's solve the problems we do have, and pay attention to that, and then worry about those other things. And I would also say that sales and marketing processes, whether you're a growth hacker, sales hacker, whatever it is, it's all about iteration, just like product is, right? So get something shitty out the door if that's what you have to do,
Hmm.
and then just make it better as time goes on. You can't sit back and let your growth be hindered because you're over analyzing your processes and trying to perfect things too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, online, it seems like you've actually built up this kind of sales process for a number of companies. I mean, you're at Storefront now, but you were a
Mhm.
part of really getting sales processes created at other companies as well. And some of the big chunks of that I want to talk through with you. One of them is messaging. Messaging is a big part of the sales process, a big part of the machinery that you're trying to put into place, to effectively acquire customers. How important is it to have the right messaging, in your opinion?
I think it's really important. It's important for internal selling as well as external selling. I think one of the things that people don't think about very often is that. when you're selling something, especially in the early stages, certain customers and certain types of engagements can actually pull internal resources, right? So you have to be mindful of what's happening internally when you're selling externally. So like if I'm selling a particular customer, that may require us to put in 100 extra hours of engineering for this customer. Is that going to be good? And so messaging internally and externally becomes really important at that point because you need to make sure that you're talking about the same thing and having kind of the same vernacular internally. I know that we've really struggled with that early on because we all kind of had a different term for what it was. And we also touch a lot of different types of customers, right? So on the demand on the renter side, we'll maybe talk to somebody who's selling on Store Envy or Shopify or Etsy, and we'll also talk to somebody who works at like a top 100 internet retailer, right? And the terms that they use are probably going to be very different. Similarly, on the supply side, we'll talk to a commercial real estate broker or a landlord, and they have very technical terms and a lot of jargon for what they do. Whereas we have a store within a store concept doing a coffee shop down the street, they're just going to call their extra space like, hey, that extra corner of room there that we have in the corner, right? So I think that messaging is extremely important for your team, for your customers, but then also taking your messaging and evolving it to whoever kind of you're talking to. So we kind of call that messaging profiles. So early on, we decided here's how we're going to segment our users on both sides. Maybe we don't know who's our perfect user yet, so we're going to continue to talk to all of them. Mm-hmm. We'll segment them and say here's what the values are for each one of them, and here's kind of how you would frame that up in terms of what language you would use and what we think are the big levers for their business, right? Yeah. What's important to them. So I'd say it's really important. And it's not very hard to establish either, to just get the team together in one meeting and agree on what you're going to call things and what you're going to use internally for that language, mm-hmm. and then see if that works externally. I think that in our product in some point, we've put internal language into our product and it hasn't resonated with the external folks. So we've had to go in and change that to something that makes more sense to them. Yeah. So we get emails. I'm confused. I don't know what this is. Like, why do you call it this? I don't do that in my line of business, right? So finding this universal language that resonates with everybody can be difficult, but it's easy to get everybody on the same page and give it a go.
Yeah, I want to dig into something you said there because it's so important. I think people don't realize how important words are, period. They think it really is about technology 100% of the time, and it rarely is. It's about the words you use to describe that technology that bridges the gap between a customer and them getting to your product. But you said you have multiple profiles of customers, which is necessary because you're dealing with some small coffee shops and other huge corporations. So obviously, the words you use are going to be different, and they're going to respond differently based on how you communicate to them. And I just want to reiterate that because companies miss this. They don't realize that one of the oldest growth hacks ever is just using the right word at the right time. That is a huge way to get inside their mind, because when people hear the words they want to hear and the kinds of words they're used to using themselves, then you're on their side. You're not somebody trying to sell them. You're somebody that gets them, and now they want to do business with you. Is that the way you guys see it?
Yeah, I totally agree. And if anybody kind of doubts that, they should probably think about the last time they received an email from somebody that was really short, one sentence, and they felt like, oh my God, this person's mad at me. You know what I mean? Like it's or you received a text message that kind of rubbed you the wrong way, or you sent somebody an email and they completely read it the wrong way. That's because of the words you chose to use and the way that you structured it. I mean, obviously it depends on the medium. If it's spoken word, there's tone, there's all kinds of things. So email can be even more difficult. Written word can be more difficult when you're kind of reaching out to somebody cold, especially. But in general, it absolutely is very important. I mean, our brains work by referencing information we've already stored. So if we don't know something about a particular concept, or it's a word we've never heard, or it's a phrase that we've never heard before, it's going to resonate with us a lot less than it would if it was something that's somewhat familiar to me. It can be quirky, it can be weird, it can be kind of like, attention grabbing, but it references things that I already understand and know about.
Yeah, and that whole conversation we're having right now, it starts with the consumer. It starts with the customer, what words they like, what words they use. And that's a big thing, is just getting inside their head. And so that's why, you said you had the internal kind of words and you put them on the site that didn't do that well. But then when you started using the words of the people that are coming to the site, it does better. That's just a universal truth. Get inside the heads of your customers, and then you'll know how to talk to them and know how to sell them.
Absolutely.
Another thing I want to talk about is pricing. How do you guys price your offerings there at Storefront? Because I'm sure it's been a difficult thing trying to figure out how to price this stuff. And I think you guys have actually come to some unique conclusions on that.
Yeah, pricing is a really interesting thing. So I've worked in a lot of different spaces. I've worked in software as a service previously, which I actually feel like pricing is very, very easy in that category because you can kind of just highball people and see what they end up on, and then you start to see some trends. For a marketplace, it's a lot different. It's been interesting. So we started off by just letting people put their prices up for whatever, which is fine. And I think that you have to start with kind of the market decides the price, right? And so then we started to pay attention to like what spaces were doing well, what categories were doing really well, and we're able to kind of lend more of a helping hand to folks when they're listing. So I think one thing that marketplaces do in terms of pricing, one thing that we try to do is just try to share best practices with your customers and try to nudge them along. I think if you look at a lot of the open marketplaces that are out there online today, I think they have much more of an impact on pricing than people would guess. They kind of tell you what they think that you're worth. Eventually they have enough data where they can do some modeling, some machine learning or whatever, and say, hey, this is what you should be pricing based on your area. But it definitely has been a challenge for us because we're kind of also doing a new category here. Like short-term retail space or short-term space in general, pop-ups is very, very new. So nobody really knows what to price. So we get industry experts that are like, what should we list this at? What do you recommend? And then we kind of just help them to say, you should go with your gut. You may say, okay, a 12-month lease costs this. Maybe I'll add 5% on because it's a premium because it's short-term. Something like that. So we also have baked in a little bit of kind of like negotiation process in the site. Oftentimes people that rent through the site and are looking at longer periods of time than what it's listed for, they're able to come to some sort of conclusion with the seller on the side that like, hey, this is probably at a price that we could agree upon. But yeah, I think that pricing is really important, and I do think it's really tough. And I don't think, from what I've seen so far, I don't think that anybody's come out with any like great pricing software or anything like that. I think I've seen a couple people do that as like a startup concept, but then they haven't made it very far because I think it's just something you have to test and kind of like get a gut feel for and look at the data as well.
Especially when you're in a market that's so new like you all. I mean, there's no one else I know of doing short-term rental spaces like this. So there's not a lot to go on in terms of historical successes on how to do it.
I don't know how this happened, but I really actually have like a history of starting at companies that aren't like they're very new. I don't really think about it when that happens. I just get excited about them. So almost every sales role I've been in the last 5-6 years has been something where it's very evangelical and you're like, you're pioneering new territory and figuring things out. And I think that, oftentimes you're pricing lower than what you should be. Actually, I think people get too guarded about that, and especially if it's a longer term sales process where I'm talking face to face to somebody, be okay with going above and beyond because you can read their body language, and and then you could retreat if you need to. If it's early on and you say a number and they're like, you could do something like, okay, so it's looks like you're probably having a vomit type reaction to pricing. We're still trying to figure out what the sweet spot is here. So maybe you can give us some understanding of what your budget is or what you would be reasonable. I'm not saying we'll find common ground, but we'll get us closer to finding common ground.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute because I think that's huge. You read any book on negotiation, which they're written at like kind of these big, partnership level deals. And what they always say is the first price, the first number you put out is really important because you can't go above that. That first number you ever speak, you can now no longer charge more than that because that's anchored in their mind as the high, and they're going to try to work you down from there. So you have to start much higher than you're actually okay with ending up at in order to do a decent, sell cycle. But the same thing is true, I think, with online products as well. And I'll just say this, even though it's not necessary for storefront, is if you start high with a SaaS product, now you can give them a discount. But if you start at the price you actually are okay with, now you can't give them a discount or it cuts into your margins. It cuts into the amount you want to make. So just always start way higher than you're comfortable. The market will scream at you and tell you what you should do. And then you have room to give discounts and read body language and get down to a better number, right?
Yeah, and reach out to somebody that you would really trust to give you an accurate perception of, like, if you have a friend that is a would-be buyer of your service, or like you're not actually trying to sell them, like, be honest. If you were going to buy this, what do you think you'd pay? And then add like 10% to that, 10, 15%.
Yeah, or 100%.
Yeah, or 100, or 100,
At least the first
depending on how
time out, make
progressive
it
you
way
are.
higher.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Now,
I think that there's a lot of scenarios where you want to add prices on. One that you experience when you're doing like enterprise sales is sometimes there's procurement groups whose sole job is to take a chunk out of your pricing. So in order to make them happy, add some pricing on to there, add some numbers on to the beginning,
mhm.
so that when you're talking to that procurement group, you're talking to your contact who is like, oh, we need a discount. I'm like, well, hold on. We're going to be talking to your procurement group who's going to want to take a chunk out of this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we go with this? You pass us on to this. I know you want to get this through. I do too. This actually gives us some room and some leverage to work with that group. We can get it going after that. So
Yeah.
I think that's a scenario that people don't see coming very often. It's pretty rough the first time if you get to a point where you've depleted all your kind of negotiation levers as you pointed out. So I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Yeah, and you talk about procurement, and online we have affiliates, and they're
Yeah.
going to take their pound of flesh. So you need
Yeah.
to leave room in the margin, and so
Yeah.
there's all these things people don't think about. But the process is not just you and customer. Sometimes there's people in the middle, and you want to leave that room there. Now, another thing that you've done with these companies is really work through the pitch materials. And my guess is it's really important for storefront because you're dealing with physical retail space, and they're used to dealing with those kind of things. But what role do pitch materials play?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question because in the beginning of my sales career and still now, I'm kind of a pen and paper salesman. I think a lot of people like to attach, like, say, like a one pager or collateral to their emails as they send them out, and I think there is a place for those. Mainly, I think the place for those is after you've communicated with somebody on their end, and then you can actually go ahead and they can share that internally. So I think it's the most pitch materials are actually great for your contact to use internally to help kind of continuously sell throughout their organization.
Mm-hmm.
That's one place that I think is really great. But I also think it's really helpful if you just kind of get a general base deck and or proposal or presentation. A lot of people have different words they use
I
for
know,
it, so
right?
we call them decks.
Yeah.
But basically, I think it's great to have that general base presentation or deck to go through. One, it's a good exercise in product marketing for you to like, what's our story,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because most of them should really be a story. You don't want to just hand out a fact sheet. You want it to be like, in the beginning, this is the problem we saw. Now here's the solution, et cetera, and kind of move on down the line. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's very helpful. It's very difficult. I think people don't think it's as hard as it is, but if you're really doing a good job, there's a story arc there and it all makes sense and it goes well together. Then you present that internally. You get all the people on the same page because remember, not everybody in your company is in customer meetings. Not everybody is on the front lines talking to customers. So it's also your job to kind of help out internally for everybody to understand, here's why we're selling it this way. Here's why the company exists and here's what happens. And I
Mm-hmm.
think people take for granted how much employees understand that. So I think it's helpful in that way. And I think the biggest part of it, honestly, is getting you to feel the story all the way through from the start to finish and feel good about it. In storefront, it started off as really important for us at first. And it's become less and less. More of what we've been focusing on now is marketing materials and case studies. Our case studies have been really huge because we're primarily dealing with a market that's not been accessible for people for a long time. So when they see other people like them doing it, it's just really helpful and kind of inspiring them. In the beginning, pop-up was really only people that were trendsetters that were really like,
Mm-hmm.
daring to be different, honestly. And like long before we came along, right? People were doing this. All the Halloween stores you see every year, seasonal stores or whatever, Spirit Halloween opens up 1,000 stores, 1,000+ stores every year around Halloween, and then they take them down, after the Halloween season's over. And that wasn't standard practice back when they started doing that. So, materials that help people relate and kind of, I think it's cheaper than ever to get a video made too, right? There's all these like younger people that are getting into video and they're starting off their businesses and they're willing to do great work for cheap. You see all these amazing videos on YouTube. Those people are hireable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So don't be afraid to get a good video of some customers early on and get them talking about your business. That's done wonders for us. Our videos are fantastic. And often it's often been our cheapest videos because some of our most expensive videos haven't actually done as well as the cheaper ones. So
Really?
that's yeah, it's kind of funny. Yeah, we have this. We did a New York launch party and we did a slow motion video booth.
Uh-huh.
The video is great, but it's gotten less views than a lot of our really basic videos that we just did in the early days. So, and I kind of organized that, so I kind of feel feel bad about it to be
Is
honest,
that the
because
one
it
with
was
all
definitely
the
the most
Halloween theme
expensive.
to it? Is it that one?
What's up?
The Halloween theme to it, the Jason mask in there or something? Is that it or a different one?
That's the so that was us getting on the Harlem Shake train really late.
Okay.
That one actually wasn't very expensive and it was a lot of fun, and so that one is worth it. There's one more that's called the slow mo video booth, where we had a phantom camera that takes like 1,500 frames per second, and so you get in there and you do some actions, but then it's slowed down in a replay. This one's on Vimeo. I'll send you the link afterwards.
Yeah, maybe we'll get the views up for you so you don't got to feel as
Yeah,
bad.
please do. It'll make me look a lot better with my company than I do right now for that project. So,
No worries.
but everybody that was at the party had a great time doing it. So we got a lot of offline impressions. And
There
we're
you go.
We're an offline company, so
Yeah, it
that's
works. You're doing things differently.
yeah.
So we've talked through some of the components of a sales process. You need messaging in place, internally, externally. You need pricing. You need to understand the negotiation process, the pitch materials online and offline, and what you're actually giving to people inside the organization to make the sale for you, what you're giving to people that are interested in you. Are there any other components, big components that we've left out that you really have to tackle early on in a company as you're figuring out your sales process? Anything else come to your mind?
Yeah, there's a million different types of sales processes, right? There's inside sales, there's outside sales, there's just, you straight up online marketing, right? And for some categories, online marketing is going to be better. So I would say that I think that the biggest challenge for a sales organization is knowing when to transition, right? So I was kind of touching on this earlier when I was talking about seeding the marketplace. There was a point where all I was doing, like basically, and not everything, but like my main focus was just go out and be in front of brokers and landlords and retailers and space owners, et cetera. So we were just doing that nonstop and doing these in-person meetings, which aren't, the most scalable thing in the world, which is fine. But those face-to-face kind of like relationships help start us off on a longer term relationships with those people as soon as they started to see success through the platform. But it was also necessary, right? Because if you went to our site at the time, we had very few listings, right? And in order for a marketplace to look like something that's like a good thing to do, it has to have a lot of content on there, a lot of listings. So we didn't have online credibility. We couldn't send you to the site to give you for you to feel like we were credible, right? So being in front of people and establishing rapport and talking to them and like getting them to trust you personally is the way that you establish credibility like that early on.
Yeah.
So that was huge for us, but now it's less of a focus for us because now we have enough listings on our site where people go to and they're like, okay, yeah, this is a real thing. This is something they do. They're taking professional photos. Look how beautiful some of these listings look. So knowing when to transition away from doing those things, I think is one of the toughest things. There's a blogger named Jason Lumpkin, who is the CEO of EchoSign formerly. He blogs on a site called Saster. And one of his great articles is about the different types of VPs of sales and when to hire them, right? And there's very few people. In his article, he says there's very few people that have made it from the start all the way to a finish. And we're talking SaaS companies, like enterprise ones. You're looking for like 100 million dollars in revenue and on for some VPs of sales, which is really, really big numbers. So when you're talking about a startup person, that's like that person you want to just like get their hands dirty, get in, get messy. They don't care if it's grunt work. They're cool. They just want to like see the needle move a little bit, right? And like get things going. And then as you move along, things change and maybe they're not the right person for the job anymore. And I think that's is due to a lot of people not like adapting and saying that there's new things that they need to do and they need to be evolving. And there probably will be a time where storefronts like, sorry, Matt, you got to get the hell out of here because you can't carry us over the goal line anymore or something like that. But I try my damnedest to like see ahead of time, like where are things moving, and right now we're moving towards more of a marketing organization than we are a straight up sales organization, which my past is in sales. So therefore, I'm learning more about marketing and digging in, right? So I think that the toughest part is that when you stop customer development and move into something that like is repeatable and you keep doing it, right? So I would also recommend people read the book Predictable Revenue. I don't agree with everything in the book, but it's a great sales process book on how can you kind of not just automate, but how can you segment up your sales process in a way or give it up in a way that will help you produce repeatable results and then get numbers from that. And then, in your investor meetings or whoever you're presenting to, they're going to feel a lot better about the numbers that you have to show them.
Yeah, that word again comes up, process. It really is about having a process, something that's repeatable, and not just trying random things that don't fit into some overall strategy. And
Yeah.
you said something I think is important is that, we usually think about the founders being ousted because they're not the kinds of people that can really grow the company. That's why it's rare to have a Bill Gates and a Zuckerberg because they stuck around the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
But your point is true that it's also the same thing for other roles in the company. The marketing person may be good early on and not later on unless they really learn to adapt and grow and figure out what's around the corner and to use the overquoted Gretzky quote, skate to where the puck's going, not to where it's been.
Yeah.
Figure out what tomorrow is, not what we did yesterday.
For sure. I think if you read Steve Blank's book about the Four Steps of Epiphany, his book, the early customer development stuff, one of the things he says there is like VPs of sales are like some of the first people to go because they're hired too early, or what they're hired for is too early, right? It's like before you found product market fit and before there's a repeatable process. So their expectations that they're expected to produce, the results they're expected to produce, don't happen, right? And people have to leave. But I think you're right when it's like actually like a much broader problem. I think it's a problem widespread in society, actually. Like you have a generation, we're coming out of like a generation of people that were able to do the same thing over and over every day for their entire lives, not move up, not move down. And some of them end up without jobs, very late in life with no new skills. So, I think it's much more of a learning economy these days. And, I can't tell you like, how much better I am because I'm an active learner and I meet with people, I try to understand what other people are doing, how did you overcome this challenge, whatever. And there's just so much at our fingertips. You talk about Udemy, you talk about any online courses, Growth Hacker TV, like these are the things people should be doing to learn more skills so that they protect themselves and that they also bring value to their company, right? Like it's not a company's responsibility to employ you. It's your responsibility to continually be employable. And I think that's like, coming from like the pension era into now, that's not something that everybody's doing. And I think that another great book for that is The Startup of You by Reid Hoffman. It's got the first chapter is fantastic. It's great about how to like look at yourself and how to improve on those things. What are the market realities? What are the assets I have? And how do I combine those together to make myself employable and make it so that people want to work with me and that I'm adding a lot of value to the company?
Yeah. And that's another key word you said, value. I just feel like all of business revolves around that word. Do you add value to your business? Then you'll stay employed probably. Does your business add value to the customers? Then you'll always have new ones. I mean, it's just about value, and that's why the old era is you can stay even if you're not valuable because you've been around so long.
Right.
Now it's all about value. Provide value or do something else. And so if people just have that mentality, they'll know what to do next, which is learn things that give you more value to the people you're around, and then you'll be fine in the future.
Yeah.
Now
being friends with your coworkers is not enough. You know what
exactly.
I mean? Like, at this point, like people get comfortable because they start to like, oh, that person, they love me. They would never get rid of me. Well, they also have to protect the other people in their company and themselves and the company, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about you mentioned you went before people doing things that didn't scale, having these one-on-one conversations, and you guys have gotten to 150 stores now. Did you get to all 150 through those kind of conversations, or was there a point in there where you stopped having conversations and all of a sudden they're finding the website and starting to contact you? Talk me through that process a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a very unique transition, and we probably didn't key into it as early as we could have. I think that's probably always the case for stuff like this. For us, the supply side, the listing side, was actually the harder side of the market to seed. It turns out that a lot of retailers want to do pop-up shops, and a lot of retailers want to do it offline. And it makes sense now. I've never been like a straight up retailer myself. Like anything I've ever tried to sell is mostly digital or software or something like that. So when you look at people that are kind of like the up and coming brand that start off in a city, where do they start? They go to like flea markets, they go to events, they try to sell at events. If you just look at the people that around you that are selling products, like physical products, and they're hustling, these are the types of things they do, right? They know, just get in front of your customers, go where your customers are, right? So Offline stores represent that just as much as online stores. And in fact, um, it might be easier to get attention on a main street somewhere in a store than it is to get attention online amongst a sea of other e-commerce stores that sell the same product as you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're next door to a dry cleaner and on the other side is a restaurant and you're the only operation that sells something in town, right? So there's also other things like scarcity at work there. So for us, the retail side, the demand side has always been there. They found us organically at first. Now they find us through our system, through a series of systems, whether that's paid channels, organic, SEO, all kinds of different stuff. They've always found us. Right? So for us, it was actually like seeding the marketplace, getting the supply side to be there, and now the supply side, there's enough word of mouth for people that are having like positive experiences and getting renters. Right? You put some money in people's pockets, they're going to come back. So we've seen a lot of people just come back and also tell their friends about it, et cetera. So it's been a positive experience. In terms of like when did we stop going out and do meetings? We haven't really stopped. We just don't proactively plan them as much. There's still important meetings to be had. It's still face-to-face stuff to be had. If you email me and you're a small retailer, I'm going to respond to you and we're going to talk about stuff and we're going to help you as much as we can. Because you never want to stop establishing those long-term relationships with people that even if they're small now, they have the chance to grow. So I think we do our best to respond to people as quickly as possible. We get a ton of incoming emails, so that's its own problem. Inbound stuff can be a problem sometimes, but
it's a good problem though. Most people want to have that problem.
yeah, it is. It is a good problem. It is a good problem to have, and then you go back to like messaging, right? Then your messaging becomes important because if you're getting inbound from a bunch of people that you shouldn't be, then it's like, well, what about my messaging is attracting those people? Maybe I need to, kind of narrow it down and only focus on getting incoming inbound traffic from qualified leads. Maybe I'm working with a bunch of people that aren't my customers, right? So, but then sometimes it's also just like letting you know and verifying who your customers are. So you got to be careful. You got to kind of listen to your gut sometimes, and then also the data, and kind of mix those things together and make a good decision. But I would say, to your point, like when do you stop kind of doing face-to-face meetings, and maybe you stop proactively planning as many of them, but never stop like having meaningful conversations with your clients or would-be clients. I would say.
No, that makes sense.
Make time for it.
Yeah, and two of the internet marketing kind of things you mentioned in there was paid and SEO. When you're doing paid and SEO, which side of the market are you focusing on with Storefront? Are you focused on trying to get people that have space or people that want space?
People that want space. So first off, like paid isn't as huge for us as like organic, and then outbound outreach has been for us. That's been our primary growth channel so far, and word of mouth is also really huge for us. So.
Let me drill in. When you say outbound and outreach, you mean like just literally emailing them because you found them?
Emails, calls, tweets, all kinds of stuff.
So you're going after them.
We're very transactional process, right? Like we can tell within 10, 15 minutes if you want to work with us on either side of the equation. It's not a long sales cycle. So you basically like start conversations. On whatever medium it is, we start conversations and then we explain, what it is we're doing and why we reached out in the first place and why it's valuable. And usually people are like about it or they're not. And we're still in that mode of like working with people that are pretty much just about it. Every now and then somebody will have a misconception. And then at that point you want to obviously overcome that objection. But if somebody's like philosophically against what we're doing or like thinks it's a waste of time for them, I'm not going to like argue with them for 10, 15 minutes because I could sign up 2 other customers during that time. Because it's so fast, right? It's such a fast process. So for us, there's not many suppliers, supply side folks yet that are out looking to like host pop-up space and not looking online to do it. They just like make it known in their local economy that they're doing this, right? So for us, for the paid stuff for like the supply side of things hasn't been a huge channel for us yet. I think that'll definitely change as we get more people aware of what we're doing and more people aware of pop-up and that it's a possibility, right? So we're still kind of educating a market right now. So that I think paid operates a lot differently when it's not like a common thing that you're looking for or a common problem that everybody has. I mean, it is a common problem that everybody has, but not everybody knows that there's a way to solve it.
And who knows what words they're using when they search for it. And it's hard to buy those words when, is it a pop-up shop? Is it short-term retail? Is it fill in the blank, something else?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those paid kind of searches work for us, but they're just not huge yet because there's not that many people looking in general for that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Our content actually does more for us than the paid channels do.
Yeah, you said something else I want to drill in on real quick. You said that there's going to be some people that just philosophically disagree with you, and I want to touch on that because I think any good business has people that philosophically disagree with them. Because if you don't have somebody that really disagrees with you, you may not be pushing things enough. You're definitely not in a disruptive industry that's moving very fast. And when you find somebody that just philosophically disagrees, let them. You can't make somebody change their religion over email. It isn't
Yeah,
going to happen. So
yeah,
let them be who they are and move on to the next sale. I see that with Growth Hacker TV. Some people reach out to me. They don't like it at all. That's okay. You don't have to. There's a lot
yeah,
of people that do, and we'll do just fine with them. With
yeah,
pop-up shops, a lot of people just hate the idea for whatever reason. Let them. And so I just want to say that for the people listening, let people that don't like you fundamentally continue to dislike you fundamentally, and do not lose any brain cycles thinking about it, worrying about it, caring about it, or trying to convince them otherwise because it's irrelevant to your long-term success.
yeah. I agree. And the longer the sales process, the more likely you are to spend a bunch of time on somebody that really actually like isn't interested at all and never will be. So there's a time to exercise walk away power and like a power play type thing where you want to get a sale, but there's also time to just walk away because
Because
it's
you don't
wasted.
care.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the more that you get into those engagements where you just get so pissed off because this person didn't agree and you tried really hard and you got heated about it and they got heated about it, and then it's like, oh, that was extremely productive for me. So I think that people learn that lesson the hard way
Yeah,
typically.
I think
I
it
did.
also I think it also gives you false signals when you're talking to people that fundamentally don't like you, what you're doing. They're going to tell you all the things you should do and all the things you should change, but their opinion actually doesn't mean that much because they're not a loyal customer who wants to be better. They're a hater who's just talking, and so you
Yeah.
actually don't even get good customer development out of them a lot of times. So I mean, you can keep a log of what they say, but don't put near as much weight on that as the ones who actually have a Visa card out paying you money.
Right. I totally agree with that as well.
Yeah. Now, you guys recently, something fun to talk about. You recently raised $1.6 million, if what the interwebs tell me is true.
It is true.
Yeah. So, how do you guys plan on spending that money in terms of growth? Because my guess is you're trying to grow, and that's one of your big focuses. So, how do you allocate $1.6 million to further that agenda?
Well, I tell you what, I'm really expensive. No, yeah, so that's a really good question. So we're kind of, what I find interesting about our organization is we do a lot of kind of non-traditional things for the tech world. Like we have like we do things like we print t-shirts, we have shopping bags, we print postcards, the type of thing that you'd see in a basic like in your general retail store. When you walk in, you go up to the front to pay, you see all these kind of like different types of advertisements, what things that look kind of like direct mailers. We don't really do any direct mailing, but we've done a lot of kind of that street team type stuff that has worked really, really well for us. Just an example of that is we made some posters that just said, hey, rent this space, something really simple. And we did a pop-up shop over at Westfield Mall, and then we didn't have anybody to go into that store. This is right in the early days after we did our first store. We didn't have anybody to go in there, but lo and behold, we found out that malls in general hate vacant storefronts, obviously. Obviously they do, but they didn't have anybody to go in there afterwards. So instead of putting like ugly advertising in there or whatever, they just were like, can you just keep your posters up in here and make it look nice and just say, hey, like this space is rentable? And it turns out that our interests in those points were aligned, right? We wanted somebody to rent it through us, and
Obviously.
they also did as well. So we left our stuff up in there, and like the amazing effect that particular thing had was like there was some a mother and daughter that sell together on Etsy. They make some stuff in their free time. They sell together on Etsy, and they're walking through the mall, and they're like, oh my God, I never knew that I could actually like open a store in the mall. It's again that accessibility thing where they never knew that this is something that's reasonable to expect that somebody locally could do that. They walked into the leasing office, started talking to them, and then eventually they referred them back to the site, and they were there to start renting from us. And we wouldn't have had that experience had we not kind of explored those other channels. So I'd say we do like a fair mix of old school and new school together, and then we try to combine them whenever possible. So that's one way that we, obviously are spending money on those kinds of marketing materials, which I think a lot of online companies will never do.
Mm-hmm.
But we deal so much with the physical world that it makes sense for us. Um, One thing that we've definitely been doing is throwing like actual pop-ups ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
usually like a one night type event where it's like kind of like a party. We invite people that are local space owners or local retailers, etc. They come meet us and they kind of enjoy what we're doing, get a feel for the
Mm-hmm.
real deal, the real offline experience, and that's been just tremendous. Our launch party in New York got ridiculously out of hand and oversubscribed. Actually, we had a space that legally pulled 80 people, 80, and we at the beginning of the week we had like 300, 400 RCPs, which was normal for us. So that'd be over the course of 5 hours. Those types
Mm-hmm.
of people would come in, and it got leaked out to some sort of like event blog, and over 2,000 people RSVP'd by the time the party had happened. So we found ourselves like hiring security guards. There's this huge line around the block. It looks like it honestly looked like we had like some celebrities coming in or
Mm-hmm.
something.
That's great.
It was a great problem to have, but also very, very stressful because I felt bad that the people were in the line for so long. But the event turned out to be great. So those are some of the things that we do. Obviously with that money, and same hiring. I mean, personnel is like one of the biggest
Mm-hmm.
expenses that you can have in a startup. Um, yeah, so that's kind of what we've been up to,
Yeah.
and
Well,
then office space and all that.
yeah, it'd be great watching Storefront's kind of progress from here on out. To close out here, let me let you plug a few things because you're involved in some other cool stuff that I think this audience will
Yeah.
want to know about. One of them is a Udemy course you have coming out, and as soon as you told me about it before we started recording, I was very excited about it.
Yeah.
So tell me about what you got going on there.
Yeah, so recently I'd recently been trying to teach myself how to code, and I'm still learning that skill set. I think that it's a really awesome thing to learn. But one of the reasons I want to learn how to code is because I saw how valuable scraping was. Like if you're in a sales role or even in a marketing role, and you've ever gone about doing list building or trying to build a list, it's incredibly infuriating, and it takes a long time, and especially building like a sales list of people to reach out to. It's like point and click. It's one of the most mind-numbing activities that you can honestly do. So
Mm-hmm.
one thing that's great for that is scraping, and by using scraping, going out and having a machine essentially go out and collect data for you off sites rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
Not only can you be more targeted and be more accurate than buying like a list from say like some sort of list service, etc. Some of them are really great. Like for instance, you had Ilya from MixRank on.
Mm-hmm.
MixRank data is legit. Don't
Mm-hmm.
don't take that as a diss against somebody like them. But we've
Mm-hmm.
used a lot of other list services before that just really haven't had the quality of data that we wanted. So I came across some software called Import.io, which has been just revolutionary for me in terms of like what I can do
Mm-hmm.
as a semi non-technical person. Even then, it's still it still does take a little kind of like technical know-how to kind of understand how scrapers work, etc. So I'm putting a course together for non-technical people on Udemy to learn how to scrape, most websites that are out there. There's still
Yeah.
some things that will be tough for you, like scraping Google is very difficult. They know all the tricks because they employ big
They're
scrapers.
Google.
But it's gonna have recipes, like I call them recipes, but it's like recipes are like Yelp, ways to Twitter handles, information off AngelList, Crunchbase, all sorts of different sites. So that
Mm-hmm.
scraping tool and that course will be coming out here in the next couple of weeks, and I'll make sure that I get you guys a code, and so all the Growth TV customers can have the course for free. So
No, that'd be great. And then that one tool, is it at import.io? Is that where to find
yeah,
that tool?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's
No, that's a good
magnificent.
one to know.
Awesome team over there. Fantastic customer service and support. It's still early, so they do have some tweaks and some bugs and stuff. They actually say that right at the top of their little browser there. But yeah, that course will be out. I have all the videos recorded. I'm just putting everything together right
Yeah,
now.
that's
So.
great. And then another thing you're involved with is the Sales Hacker Conference. And so it's a conference coming up, but I believe up until now it's been kind of a monthly meetup that you've done there in San Francisco. So tell us real quickly, if somebody's interested in that conference, who's it for, and can they still get tickets?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's saleshackerconference.com. You can still get tickets. It's next week on October 17th. It is a conference for anybody that is, endeavoring out to do a sales process. I think it's really valuable for people that are early in their sales process, but it's also very valuable for people that are veterans and sales leaders. It's great because there's all these folks that are just extremely experienced talking about different ways to leverage new software, new techniques, and essentially take work that would take you, like the example would be like, this used to take me 10 hours, now it takes me 10 minutes because of all these techniques and different pieces of software I'm using, combining them together to make this awesome process. And that's how the meeting started. We were just a bunch of founders and sales execs, et cetera, getting together, talking about strategies that work for us, and then sharing and learning from each other. And so we wanted to take that and put it on a bigger platform. And shout out to my buddy Max Altschuler, who's really running the whole show. I'm kind of tangentially involved. So he's doing the majority of the work, and he's got ridiculous speakers lined up for this. That book I mentioned, Predictable Revenue, earlier, Aaron Ross is going to be there. The blog Saster, the former CEO of EchoSign, Jason Lumpkin, great speaker. He's going to be there, as well as a host of other folks. Ilya from Mixed Rank is speaking. So there's a lot of great content to be had. And I'm personally, like, I'm helping organize, but I'm going to learn a ton the day of. So I'm really excited for it.
That's the way it goes. Well, it sounds like a great event. I have one last question for you here. I asked this to all my guests to kind of close out. It's a high-level question. You obviously don't know the specifics of anybody listening, but what's the best advice that you have for any startup that's trying to grow?
Best advice for any startup that's trying to grow. It's really overused, but just like, go talk to customers, be in front of people. The more time you spend in a room with somebody, the more you get to know your market. So in the beginning, don't be afraid to just blitz people and get in front of them, and be in the room with people, reading body language, reading their reactions, getting to know their real things. The only other thing I would say is, this is probably something that people don't also say, but get them out of the room as well, right? So everybody says, get out of the room, go talk to people. Get them out of their office as well. Take them to a bar, have happy hours, something like that. Go to a coffee shop, whatever. Get them out of their environment as well. That's where you establish real relationships with people, is in a more casual setting. So, if you can get those really, really genuine, awesome relationships out of the gate with perfect customers of yours, you're going to be doing a lot better, because they'll be a great sounding board for you as time goes on. And you can talk to them in a way that you wouldn't be able to talk to just any customer, right? Like, you can really get real feedback from them, and take the feedback on the chin as well. Don't shy away from like them telling you where your product sucks.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice, Matt. This has been an awesome interview. Thank you so much for coming on Growth Hacker TV.
Thank you very much for having me.